What's going on, guys and girls? My name is Scott or Zephyr. If you're new around here, welcome into the channel. If you aren't, welcome back. And in today's video, we're actually going to be doing something a bit different. I've wanted to do this video for a while, or this kind of series for a while. So we're going to break down the Toronto Regional. I've said before, I wanted to make a bit more educational content. There's only so much ladder that my actual mentality can take. And this is my start at doing that. I mean, I kind of started the other day with the video that was about Landorus, Iron Hands, and Fluttermane being very dominant in the meta. And that video popped off, and I really thank you guys for watching that, for supporting it, for leaving feedback. That means the world to me. Being able to interact with other like-minded individuals that play the same game and see things from different perspectives is really, really nice. And I definitely want to see more of that on the channel. But today's, as I said, is going to be about breaking down the Toronto Regional. The main reason I want to do this is because I want to be able to educate newer VGC players on why things are this way, why this is important, that sort of vibe. And I think that sort of content can go a long way in Pokemon, because a lot of people want to learn to play the game like I did over a year ago, where the game used to be very, very hard to get into because, you know, it was a lot harder to breed Pokemon, all that sort of jazz. It's a lot easier now. Game Freak have done an amazing job at nullifying it down so that a lot of newbie players can get into the game. And as much as I think that's a really, really good thing, I also think it's a lot to take in for a new player. There's a lot of things you've got to know. You've got to know about the types and things like immunities, like Dark being immune to Prankster, Grass being immune to Spore. But you've also got to know about the Pokemon and why certain Pokemon are more dominant, and why when things shake up, especially things like Pokemon pick rates and stuff like that, that is a really important thing to note down, and also why it is. And yeah, so I want to make this video today to kind of educate people on that, and I really hope it's good, and I hope you guys enjoy it. So without further ado, let's get into the first part of this video. So the top 3 Pokemon are the 3 things I want to talk about to start with that are relevant on both of these photographs. So that being Fluttermane, Hans, and Landorus Therian. Hans, Fluttermane, and Lando have all dropped in percentage use, which is crazy, but also not surprising with the creativity that people are trying to follow up and actually counter these Pokemon with. Landorus and Iron Hands are not very surprising to me, and neither is Fluttermane actually managing to climb and claw its way back up to the top spot. And I think the easiest reason to explain why that is that throughout all of the regulations we've played competitively in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet's lifetime, we have had an extreme lack of special attackers in each and every format. As you can see from these 2 graphs here, we had 4 in Lily and we had 3 in Toronto. In Lily, we had Flutter, Tornadus, Heatran, and Chi-Yu. And then in Toronto, we had the same 3, but Chi-Yu has dropped off and been replaced by even more physical attackers. And that is because we are in such a hyper-aggressive, physically favored format right now, which once again isn't surprising because pretty much all of the Pokemon across these 2 regionals top 12 are incredible for dealing damage in their utility, etc. But also because Xianpao, the Snow Leopard in both of these, if you are new to VGC, enables them even further with its ability Sword of Ruin that allows it to lower the defense of every Pokemon besides itself on the field, meaning Urshifu deals more damage, Lando, Hands, you get the gist. So to finalize on Fluttermane, I'm not surprised it's become the most picked Pokemon out of the top 12 at Toronto, again over Lily, because it is easily the best special attacker in the format. It hits most of these Pokemon for neutral to super effective damage. If it only hits for neutral, it still hits like an actual truck, and it is by far the most relied upon and best special attacker in the format right now. So now that we've talked about Fluttermane in depth, I kind of want to move on to Iron Hands. I would talk about Iron Hands and Landorus at the same time, but as far as I'm concerned, they're 2 completely different Pokemon that are on the team and serve different purposes. So I'll talk about Landorus in a minute, but for the moment we're going to talk about Iron Hands. And yes, its pick rate has dropped by almost 10% between the 2 regionals, but there's still so much to love about this Pokemon. Iron Hands is still busted good. If you take a look at the Pokemon, there are literally 2 or 3 Pokemon that it doesn't line up super well into. It's got insane bulk, it's got Drain Punch, it's got great attack stats. The Assault Vest pretty much sorts out its special defense problem, although it still doesn't want to walk into Fluttermane anytime soon. But this Pokemon is just generally amazing. Like, it's probably the best Pokemon to come out of Generation 9 as of yet. It gets Fake Out. Like, there is very minimal that Iron Hands does not, like, do. And how do you beat another Iron Hands besides the blatant counters? You just have your own Iron Hands. It's really that simple. It can one-shot Fluttermane with Heavy Slam, and all these reasons just add up to why it's managed to maintain a 50% pick rate since its introduction in Regulation C. It's just so good. There's nothing that this Pokemon cannot do. However, as easy as it is to identify all the good things about Iron Hands, I think it's also as easy to identify the bad things, and I think the first thing we have to talk about is Fluttermane. Now, it's no secret these two Pokemon are each other's worst enemies. They both hit each other for super effective damage. Fluttermane can actually almost one-shot Iron Hands, and that is pretty much why Iron Hands primarily runs the Assault Vest, because of the Terra Fairy Moonblast, Choice Spec Moonblast, all that sort of thing. And Iron Hands can actually one-shot Fluttermane with Heavy Slam, dependent on the situation. I think it is like a more 70-30 kind of thing, but under the right circumstances like Will-O-Wisp and Intimidate, Fluttermane can live. So it is possible. It's just very, very slim to none. But besides that, I think the only other real reason that Iron Hands has dropped in usage at all is because of the amount of physical damage mitigation we have in the format right now. We have Intimidate everywhere, Will-O-Wisp, Heatwave Burns. There's so much to kind of suppress physical attacking Pokemon because of how many of them are in the format. Like, as I've already said, like over 60-70% of the top 12 Pokemon are physically aggressive Pokemon, and that shows with the amount that people are actually prepping for these Pokemon compared to special attackers like Fluttermane or Heatran. Alright, so I want to finally move on to the third most picked Pokemon of both these regionals, that being Landorus T. But before I go on a massive tangent about it, I just want to say I'm going to go into depth explaining about Landorus Firion, and then for the rest of the Pokemon I'm going to give a brief description, as not too much really changes here, besides the things that do I will pick up on, but I don't want this video to be a massive slog and be like an hour long, and I want people to actually be able to enjoy watching the video and understand what I'm talking about as well. So yeah, I'm going to give a good explanation for Lando T, then we're going to go brief, and then we're going to move on to day 2, starting now. So Lando T is quite easily one of the best Pokemon ever created. Not only does it have great typing aggressively and defensively, it has minimum weaknesses and it hits like a truck. It's got a great base stat total, its points are all well rounded, it's not really got anything it's discreetly bad at, it's got a great move pool, and then to top it all off, it's got Intimidate as well. So yeah, a legendary with Intimidate, absolutely, that was a great idea. So Lando has actually dropped a significant amount since Lily. So at Lily it had a 53.8% pick rate, and at Toronto it has a 40.3%, and that is really, really interesting considering how great a Pokemon this is and how meta-defining Landorus T actually is. I think the main cause of this is the fact that people have realised how great Landorus is at what it does, and a lot of people are building to counter it. Waterpon is really, really good into it. Urshifu Rapid Strike is also a great Pokemon into it, as well as Chiarmpao, and to be honest, a lot of these Pokemon on this Rillaboom as well, they all hit fairly well into it. It's still going to take a hit or two, and Intimidate is obviously going to allow it to stay around a bit longer, but all of these Pokemon hit significantly well into it, and Lando does not want to be taking any Ice-type move or Water-type move, so a lot of the metagame really does just counter it, and I think that's probably why it's dropped in usage a fair amount, because people are realising, you know, as good as it is, there are a lot of Pokemon that can just kind of outright deal with it there and then. Okay, so now that the top 3 heavy hitters are out the way, I want to kind of give my honourable mentions before I move on to day 2. So I want to talk about Rillaboom, moving up 5% in Toronto over from Lily. I think that's kind of based. It's definitely up there, and I think obviously Ogerpon is used to wall Landorus, it's used to wall a lot of these heavy hitters, but actually Rillaboom is the perfect counter for that. It's got U-turn, so it hits it super effectively, same as Lando does, and Ogerpon obviously does not want that from physical type Pokemon when it's boosting special defense. Not just that, but Rillaboom supplies for the team with grassy terrain, letting you heal your Iron Hands, letting you heal your Rillaboom, your Heatran, that sort of thing. And it also gets grassy glide, so if the Ogerpon terrestrializes to try and avoid that U-turn damage, then you just take it out with grassy glide. It really is that simple. And Rillaboom also lines up really, really well into Surgeon Strike, Urshifu Rapid Strike, as we all know. I think Rillaboom is a hard counter for that Pokemon especially, and to be honest, I think it fits onto the majority of teams. It hits hard, it's pretty woolly, it can run Citrus Berry, Assault Vest, it can do a numerous amount of things, and it just supplies value for being there, to be honest. And my final mentions go to Hisuian, Arcanine, and Dragonite. Dragonite actually managing to climb back into the top 12. Chiarmpao Dragonite core never got weaker, never really went anywhere, it was just seen less. This proves that that is on the way back up, and Dragonite, whether it's using Extreme Speed, Outrage, Stomping Tantrum, is nothing to laugh at. It is a very, very powerful Pokemon, which obviously has no intentions of going anywhere, and Hisuian Arcanine is slowly becoming the best Intimidator Pokemon in the format right now. It's actually won 4 out of 4 regional titles in Regulation E so far, and if that doesn't speak volumes, I don't know what will. It plays a lot like Arcanine, just more aggressive. Most people are opting to use Choice Band on it to absolutely nuke whatever it goes into before it gets rid of off the field. And yeah, let's move on to day 2. So as you can see, guys, a lot actually changes at day 2 for both the regionals, but mainly I want to talk about Toronto and the rise in Hisuian Arcanine usage, because I think that's super super interesting. In day 2 of Toronto, Hisuian Arcanine actually beats Landorus T as the Intimidator of choice for most of the players. And I would actually go as far to say as Hisuian Arcanine has one of the best offensive typings in the game right now. There is a very bare minimum that this Pokemon does not hit like a nuke, and it shows. You know, it can definitely OHKO Tornadus, Chiampao, it can do a ton of damage to Iron Hand, it probably takes out Rillaboom with a Choice Band, Among Us, Iron Bundle doesn't particularly want to see that, called Dengo, the list goes on. It's very, very, very obvious why this Pokemon's being picked a lot. It may be kind of glass cannon-y because of its typing, but, you know, when you press Choice Band Flare Blitz or Choice Band Rock Slide into the majority of these Pokemon, they are definitely going to feel it if they aren't full-on KO'd at the start. And so I can actually completely and utterly understand why Hisuian Arcanine's usage absolutely doubles basically the next day at Toronto, whereas at Lily it didn't really see a lot of play. But it obviously has been picked up by a lot of big players because, you know, 32% usage up from 20%, 14% is a massive, massive jump in popularity. Another really big bit of information I want to talk about is the use of Kingambit in Lily at day 2, as Kingambit wasn't even visible on the top 12 Pokemon graph for Lily on day 1, and this is obviously to do with the amount of Intimidate usage in the format, whether that's Hisuian Arcanine, Landorus T, Gyarados formerly, but not really seen so much now, and Kingambit is kind of there to be able to tackle all of that. I think it's a really smart pick by high-level VGC players to use a Defiant Pokemon to be able to actually get an instant Swords Dance basically off and then get another one off and start taking KOs. The main Kingambit set we see right now is the Black Glasses Terra Dark, and if this thing can get a Defiant boost and then just get one Swords Dance off, it can absolutely ruin pretty much any of these Pokemon on this list today with no problems. Kingambit Kurtal Cleave hits like an actual nuke, just like Arcanine does, and I think it's really, really interesting that people opted to bring Kingambit to day 2 of Lily and day 1, obviously, but obviously there was not a lot of use for it in day 1, and it's really shone through with the high-level VGC players on day 2, because it is a really, really good Pokemon, and it kind of just fell off out of nowhere, no fault to its own, because, as said, it is a really good Pokemon, but it's very, very cool to see it being used as like a niche pick to counter Intimidate and see that carrying over to day 2. So obviously that had some relevance. Another bit of information that isn't really, you know, surprising, but is information nonetheless, is Urshifu actually getting the top usage as the most used Pokemon at Toronto in day 2. This doesn't really come as a surprise to me, and it probably doesn't to a lot of VGC players, because Urshifu pretty much just shouldn't exist. The ability Unseen Fist, if you don't know, allows you to hit Pokemon through Protect, and Urshifu Single and Rapid Strike both get special moves that hit for critical hits every single time, and Surgeon Strikes hits 3 times, whereas Wicked Blow is one big hit. This is broken. There should be no Pokemon with this ability. We have moves like Feint and other moves that hit through Protect and do minimal damage. That is completely acceptable, but you should not be having a Pokemon be able to hit you for like upwards of like 100+ damage, potentially even KOing you through Protect. There's literally no counterplay to Urshifu. It really does suck. I mean, you can use Pokemon, like as I said before, Rillaboom, Fluttermane, really hits nicely into it. But the problem is, Urshifu just runs Choice Scarf and goes jolly full investment in speed, and it will go pretty much before anything, unless Tailwind is active. And that means if you've got one of the certain Pokemon on this list that doesn't particularly want to see Urshifu on the field here, then you're probably going to lose it unless you make a pivot, and then you risk losing a Pokemon as well. So yeah, it's no surprise it rose at Lily on day 2. It's no surprise it's the top used Pokemon on day 2 at Toronto. And honestly, I don't know if that will ever change, really, as long as it's in the format, because it's just too good. Having a Pokemon with this ability just is unreal. That this even actually got made in Generation 8, and a lot of VGC players hate it, but it's kind of just here now, and there's not really much we can do about it, so we just have to use it, realistically speaking. However, what I believe to be the most interesting and fascinating facts that you can pull from both of these screenshots of the top 12 Pokemon across the regionals is the use of Ogerpon. So it's no surprise since Ogerpon released that it's taken VGC by storm. It's an incredibly great Pokemon, it's got great stats. It's a bit glass candy, but Ivy Cudgel is an absolutely crazy move. 100 base damage, never misses unless obviously evasion stats are up and such, but also has higher chances at hitting critical hits. And so Ogerpon has seen a lot of usage since its release into Regulation E throughout the regionals, up to Lily. And as you can see from day 2 in Lily, that still stands. You've still got Waterpon, you've still got Firepon, but at the top 12 on day 2 in Toronto, neither of those Pokemon are to be seen. And in fact, they were very minimally ran by the trainers at the event. The 2 Pokemon that actually top cut out of the 4 Ogerpons were Rockpon and the Teal Mask Pon. And these 2 Pokemon were not seen at all, basically. I know people have been playing around with them nichely and such, but they were actually ran to success here because they all pretty much top cut, which is incredible. You know, Cornerstone Ogerpon was probably seen as the weakest variant because Sturdy is an okay ability, but, you know, it's not absolutely great. But as I've said before, I think Rock is a really, really great offensive typing right now with Hisuian Arcanine, and I think Ogerpon benefits from that. And then the Teal Mask is just kind of like the King Gambit of the event. It has Defiant, it gets a speed boost from Terastallization, and Jamie Boyd ran it to some great success. He did very, very well piloting that Pokemon. But enough about the teams. We'll talk about that when we actually get into the team breakdowns. I just think it's really, really important information to see how that upwards climb for Ogerpon just completely nullified as we got to day 2 at Toronto, considering how much it was used at all the other regionals. Rillaboom is also super interesting here to me, guys, because on day 1 of Lily, it capped at 29%, and on day 2, it actually dropped into the bottom 6 Pokemon at 22%, whereas at Toronto, it capped at the 4th place in 33%, and actually continued to stay in that 4th place, and actually capped up to 36%. And I think this comes down to a lot of stuff I've already talked about. Rillaboom hits Urshifu incredibly hard, Slash can almost one-hit KO if it doesn't one-hit KO it. It hits Fluttermane for almost half, if not higher damage. Wood's Hammer is an incredibly powerful form of stab for Rillaboom that only started really seeing play this generation compared to last gen when Grassy Glide wasn't nerfed. It can OHKO Fluttermane, it definitely OHKOs Urshifu, and I wouldn't be surprised to see it do a ton of damage to a lot of other Pokemon on this list, especially when it's got Grassy Terrain, which is Rillaboom's ability, obviously, and it can capitalize on that. And it's just a really good support Pokemon at the same time by existing, you know? Grassy Terrain, say with Leftovers Heatran, Protect, Substitute, I've used this set before. It is very, very strong. Once that Heatran is behind the sub, it's incredibly difficult to get it back out, and it can just start taking KOs left, right, and center, as well as being able to provide offensive pressure on the field, and it has Fake Out as well. So I'm really not surprised Rillaboom continued to hold, but I am surprised to see its pick rate really shoot up from Lily to Toronto. And finally, guys, to finish breaking down the days, I want to talk about the final 3 Pokemon that are on the top 12 Pokemon for Toronto, and one that actually carried over to Lily. So let's start off with Among Us. Among Us is quite possibly the best support Pokemon ever created. It has seen countless play through the generations all the way up to now, and that's no different now. It has fallen off a little bit recently, but it was so strong in the beginning, and the meta has just changed to be more hyper-aggressive, so Among Us is a bit less suited in that retrospective, but it's still a really good Pokemon. It single-handedly made Safety Goggles a priority item on most teams throughout the beginning regulations because Rage Powder is inherently strong. Being able to say, hey, look at me, I'm Among Us, destroy me, over say, hey, I'm Iron Hands, destroy me. It can allow you to pick up an extra pick. It can completely swing the game in your favor momentum-wise, and it makes Among Us inherently strong, as I've already said. That on top of having access to Spore, being very, very bulky, Terastallization giving it an even further buff by being able to negate damage if you really need it to do that, and having Pollen Puff, allowing your teammates to be able to regenerate health, is so, so strong. It is a madness. I know a lot of VGC players are kind of sick of Among Us at this point. I would not be surprised to say I'm the same, but I can completely understand why it still sees use and it's coming back up in the population. The only problem for Among Us is it can't redirect grass types, so say Rillaboom or such, and with Rillaboom being quite priority in the meta right now, it does get a bit like, but it does what it needs to do super well. It can take a hit from the majority of these Pokemon here. There are Pokemon it doesn't really want to see. It doesn't want to see Choice Band, Hisuian Arcanine for sure. It doesn't like seeing Torn. It doesn't like seeing Iron Bundle, but it can probably take a hit from Iron Bundle. But as long as its priority purpose is to get onto the field and heal something or put something to sleep, that can, as said, swing the game in your favor more than happily. It's not surprising to see it rise back up on the usage, but it's been a fair amount of time where it's been on the lower side of the Pokemon used at these events. So yeah, I think it was kind of just the glue that people needed for their team at this event, and it definitely did that because, well, it's back in the top 12. So lastly, the 2 Pokemon that didn't even make it onto the top 12 Pokemon for day 1 and day 2 of Lily or day 1 of Toronto are Gholdengo and Iron Bundle. And I think these are just 2 very well thought about meta calls that people made going into Toronto. Gholdengo saw a lot of play at the beginning of Regulation A, B, and C and such because the Pokemon has an insane amount of damage output that it can do, whether you're using Choice Specs Make It Rain, Terra Steel, or Nasty Plot Leftovers. Gholdengo can hit everything for insane amount of damage. Make It Rain is a crazy move, with the only drawback being lowering your special attack by 1. When you can mitigate that with Nasty Plot, this move is actually ridiculous. It doesn't miss, it hits really, really well into almost everything. It KOs Flutter Mane instantaneously. The ice types don't like to see it, but also the things it doesn't hit for very effective damage also don't really like taking the Make It Rain. So Gholdengo is not really a surprise. I think it's more of a meta call that people made, and it definitely was a good one because it came up in Toronto super well in day 2 compared to day 1. And I think the same for Iron Bundle. Iron Bundle saw a lot of play at the beginning when it came out in Regulation C, and it slowly fell off, and I think that's because people could just kind of OHKO it. But it's obviously seeing use again on day 2 of Toronto because I once again think it's a really good meta call into a lot of the Pokemon here. Urshifu doesn't like to see it, neither does Hisuian Arcanine. Landorus definitely does not want to see Iron Bundle. Among Us, Heatran, Tornadus. I think Iron Bundle is really good into the majority of these top 12 Pokemon. It's super fast. With Booster Energy, I don't think there's anything here that outspeeds it unless it has Tailwind or Photosynthesis, Quarter Drive itself. And it's also a really good support Pokemon. It's got access to Icy Wind, so it can continue to lower your opponent's speed tiers. Hydro Pump, even though it misses, hits like an actual train into the majority of these Pokemon. It's got Encore. The Iron Bundle is just a really cool Pokemon with a lot of kit. And as I said, I think it was a really clever niche medical pick for a lot of the teams in this event. So going into this next section of the video, we're going to be primarily talking about the day 2 teams at Toronto, mainly because I talked about the differences in pick rates from Lily to Toronto, because that's really interesting to look at. But obviously Lily's in the past now, and we're further on into, say, the metagame for Regulation E. And so I really want to pick up on what people were doing at Toronto over Lily, because that's kind of in the past, even if it was a couple weeks ago. And the teams have really changed up. There are some really cool, interesting picks on these teams that the players brought, such as Justin Tang, Jamie Boyd, and I think it's really much more interesting to look at the teams that are being played now compared to the teams that have kind of been used and have fallen off. There is one team we'll talk about that's between the two, and that's the team that won both of the regionals, but primarily, as said, I want to focus on what people are playing now and why it's cool and why it works. So let's go. So first up, I want to talk about Justin Tang's team, and I really like this team. I know he built it with 2 of his friends. They all built this team and they all took it and they all placed really well. Justin placed in the top 8, which is really incredible, especially since he has a Choice Scarf Salamence on his team, which is unheard of in this regulation so far and pretty much beforehand, but it actually did work for him, so it's super impressive, and it's nice to see not all the same 12 top Pokemon being used in the metagame as of current. So this team is all about Gholdengo, and Gholdengo just dishing out as much damage as possible. It's got things to glue it together like Among Us and Iron Hands, which are, as I've already talked about, staples of EGC. Good support Pokemon in Among Us, and Iron Hands is just a great Pokemon overall. I think personally it fits on any team. Salamence is primarily there to be able to set Tailwind and as a special attacker, because as I've said, there's not a ton of special attackers around in the format, but Salamence is a special attacker, it's an Intimidate user, and to be honest, this Pokemon can hit really hard. Draco Meteor from Salamence actually does a ton of damage. Run the calcs and come back and experience it for yourself, to be honest. Hurricane is a really good choice because you've got Pelipper on the team, so as long as the rain's up, you're going to be hitting all of them. Air Slash for a form of flinch, and if there's flinch chances, you've always got a chance to win the game. And then Tailwind, which he didn't use too much, I don't believe, but obviously having speed control is super important as well, and Choice Scarf Salamence is pretty much guaranteed getting that Tailwind off. So this was a really interesting choice of Pokemon. It was really nice to see it, because I didn't think we'd see many niche picks coming into this tournament, especially with the metagame being so centralized. But Salamence was a really cool breath of fresh air, and really impressive to see actually do well in a Regulation E tournament. We've got Iron Bundle, which is something else I talked about, with Icy Wind, Freeze Dry, Hydro Pump, pretty much the primary set, with the Booster Energy, so that it can outspeed almost anything. This Pokemon, as I said already, is a really good pick for dealing with things like Landorus T. It can do damage to Urshifu Rapid Strike, Dragon-type Pokemon as well as Fire-type Pokemon like Hisuian and Arcanine. I think Iron Bundle kind of fell off, as I said already, and it's kind of finding a way back into the meta, because its typing is so good, its speed is really good, and it can just dish out damage. The only downside to Iron Bundle personally is Hydro Pump being 70 accuracy or 80, whichever it is, and you can win or lose a game based on Hydro Pump. We all know that as VGC players. When you see your Iron Bundle with an Hydro Pump, that is like the worst thing you could ever see. And then I really like the choice of Pelipper here, because Pelipper like allows Gholdengo to really flourish. It allows Salamence to use Hurricane. It's a really intricate bit of kit here. The Focus Sash means that Pelipper's going to stay up and your opponent has to double it, but you've got Wide Guard to be able to block those double slot hitting moves that a lot of Pokemon are running right now. You've got Weather Weather Ball, which is really, really interesting because I don't think Weather Ball was around before Regulation E, but now it's got it. Pelipper's got a pretty accurate form of water damage. That's really, really good. Hurricane, just like Salamence, is fully 100% accurate in the rain, and Pelipper sets that, so it's a no-brainer to have it on there. But the main point is the rain, and the rain really benefits Salamence, it benefits Gholdengo, because Gholdengo is obviously steel, so it doesn't want to get hit by Hisuian Arcanine or other fire types, and the rain kind of allows it to do that, and if it gets threatened by, say, like Fluttermane or such, you've got the Dragon Terror, so that if the Fluttermane fires off a Shadow Ball, you're kind of playing that mind game on, is he going to Terror, is he not, do I make a mistake, and if you make the wrong play, Gholdengo can quite easily get a nasty plot off, and then use Make It Rain, and probably KO both of your Pokemon in most circumstances. This is the leftovers Gholdengo, so that you can actually recover, play the Protect game. If your opponent brings Rillaboom, you've got grassy terrain as well, and Gholdengo becomes quite a problem to deal with if it's left just kind of sitting there and setting up and able to get its HP back whenever you do damage to it, and then having the rain as well is going to stop those pesky fire types from doing as much damage to it. But as said, you've got the Dragon Terror too, so you've got that, and yeah, this team is really, really well built. As I said, you've got the Glue, you've got the Iron Hands that fits on anything, you've got the Amoonguss for support, Gholdengo is the main damage typer, Salamence is such a cool pick, and then Iron Bundle and Pelipper really fit together as well. So yeah, I really love this team, and this team shows that you don't just have to use the top 12 Pokemon to actually, you know, do well in these tournaments. You know, there are a couple picks here that are obviously, you know, Iron Hands, but yeah, this team is fantastic. I think it's really well intricately crafted, and I really, really loved watching him play it. So next up, we've got Jamie Boy, and Boy is this team's source. Jamie came top 4 with this team, and this team is completely off the grid. This team is not anything that anybody thought they were going to be seeing this weekend. So we've got the support Roaring Moon, which is really, really cool, and we've got the teal mask Ogerpon compared to the traditional fire or water Ogerpons we see. We've got the Thunderous Firion, which is a really cool bit of kit as well, and then we've got Urshi, Arcanine, and Gholdengo. And I primarily want to talk about Roaring Moon, Teal Mask, Ogerpon, and Thunderous because I've talked a lot about Hisuian Arcanine and Urshifu in this video, and Gholdengo I literally just talked about. This one's just running a Life Orb and Steel Terror, so it's just go all out, do as much damage as possible Gholdengo, rather than having that recover ability. But the support Roaring Moon is super cool to me because you don't traditionally see support Roaring Moons, but I really, really like this in combination with the Intimidate Arcanine. So Roaring Moon can actually come out and kind of do Arcanine's job for it. It means you don't necessarily need to bring the Pokemon. It's got Knockoff, which is a really strong move that Roaring Moon has gained from the DLC. Breaking Swipe, which lowers the attack of both the opposing Pokemon, which is also Stab for Roaring Moon, so it's not going to do a ton of damage, but it's definitely going to benefit you in the support department. It's got Tailwind, because Roaring Moon is a pretty good Tailwind setter, and Protect, because Protect is pretty much traditional. It's got the Booster Energy, and I can't remember if this was for attack or speed, but it'll be either of those to boost its attack when it's damaging, or to actually boost its speed to get Tailwind off, etc. And it's got the Poison Terror, which is just there to kind of deflect Fluttermane, because Fluttermane kind of destroys Roaring Moon. So I think this is a really cool pick for Jamie to take. Jamie's known for bringing all sorts of weird and wacky teams, but every decision he makes is calculated, and it's not surprising to see him take a team like this to top 4. So yeah, I think he put a lot of effort into thinking about every move set, his EV spreads, as he's known for his EV spreads as well, and I just think this Roaring Moon is a super cool Pokemon in itself. Next, we have the Teal Mask Ogerpon, which is an absolutely unique pick because nobody was bringing this, but Jamie did, and it did really, really well. And I think it breathed life into the other Ogerpon forms that weren't seeing a lot of play at the time. Obviously, the Cornerstone Mask and the Teal Mask were kind of the underrated gems, but obviously now that it's actually had a top 4 placement, I think people are probably playing around with it. So the unique thing about Teal Mask Ogerpon is that it's always wearing the Teal Mask, and it can actually carry an item. So Jamie opted to give this the Razor Claw, which boosts your critical hit chance, which basically means every 1 in 2 Ivy Cudgels is going to be a crit hit, and that is actually super scary. And then you've got Sword Stance as well, so if you get 1 Sword Stance off, you're getting 200 plus base damage Ivy Cudgels with crits. It's insane the amount of damage this thing can do, especially if you Terror it, because the Teal Mask actually gets a speed boost, so it's going to outspeed the Fluttermanes that have calced to outspeed Ogerpon in normal circumstances. And it also gets Defiant, so it gets to do Kingambit's job rather than Kingambit doing it. And, you know, with the extra speed it gets, the Stomping Tantrum, it can deal with Kingambit, it can deal with Iron Hands. This Pokemon is actually a formidable threat, and is actually, you kind of have to respect it, because if you don't, then it's just going to run down your entire team. Obviously, Spiky Shield is on there as well, because it's just a better Protect, and Ogerpon gets that. But this was such a unique bring, and I really enjoyed watching Jamie pilot this Pokemon. It was super cool to see the one type of Ogerpon that nobody had really thought about, besides the Cornerstone Mask that was here as well, actually see use and do really well, because it just goes to show that you don't have to zone in on the two that were doing well. You can experiment with the other ones and you can find some success with them too. And finally, and another reason why I really like this team, is the Thunderous Firion that Jamie had, because once again, I don't think anybody was probably actually bringing Thunderous Firion, if anyone brought it to this regional. It's a really, really cool set. It's got the Assault Vest to boost special defense, because then it doesn't take as much damage from things like Fluttermane, for example, and Guldengo. It's got Thunderbolt and Wild Bolt, which is pretty normal for Thunderous or Thunderous Firion to have, because they're both great forms of stab. It's got Terra Blast, so it can go Terra Flying and be that Terra Flying type that Landorus T likes to be as well. But it's also got Grass Knot, and I feel like this is to deal with the heavy Pokemon like Iron Hands and have some form of damage to actually deal to it, because if you think about it, if Thunderous and Iron Hands end up final on the field, you're not really going to be doing a lot of damage with either Thunderbolt or Wild Bolt Storm, if any. So Grass Knot is a really, really cool bit of tech to be able to actually deal damage with if you end up in that sort of situation, and I would presume that that's the reason that he put it on this Thunderous. So yeah, I really like Jamie's team, just like I like Justin. It's got some really cool unique picks on it with the Ogerpon and the Thunderous, but it's also got some meta threats like Hisuian Arcanine and Urshifu on it. I also like the splash plate on the Urshifu. I don't know what the reason for that is, but I just really like that it's there instead of the typical Mystic Water. But yeah, Jamie makes really cool teams whenever he participates or whenever he actually plays on stream or that sort of thing. He actually won with a Cottony once, which is really, really impressive as well, and I expect nothing less from such a veteran player like him. Yeah, once again, it just shows that you don't need to use every single top 12 Pokemon on your team in all 6 slots to be able to have any success in this current regulation. Right, we're down to the second to last team now, and it's Ragav, and I love Ragav. I think he is an incredible player. He makes some super cool teams, and this team is pretty meta, to be honest. The Tornadus, the Rillaboom, Hisuian Arcanine, Urshifu, all quite basic things that we see in Regulation E as of current. Torn Urshifu is kind of the core right now and the one to beat, and that's why this Torn has Rain Dance to be able to give Urshifu that further damage with Surgeon Strikes. Urshifu actually has Poison Terror though, and I assume just like Roaring Moon on Jamie's team, this is just a cover for Fluttermane, because Fluttermane is such a nuisance to all these fighting types that do tons of damage, as well as the Dark types, the Dragon types, that sort of gist. Rillaboom, as I said already, is a really great Pokemon. It's got Fake Out, it's got the Assault Vest, which is primarily what you see most Rillabooms have, but it's got Grass Terror, and I think this is really interesting because this means that Ragav is using Rillaboom to try and get as much damage as possible, whether that's with Wood Hammer or Grassy Glide when necessary. I definitely think that's an interesting bit of information to take away from his team. Hisuian Arcanine is using the Water Terror, and this is more of a support Hisuian Arcanine, which I really like, because a lot of the Hisuian Arcanines right at this moment in time are aggressive with the Choice Band and just firing attacks off and being nukes, whereas this is using the Will-O-Wisp, which is something that Dusclops has also been using in Regulation E, and I think a lot of people are kind of just not accounting for Will-O-Wisp right now. Seeing Hisuian Arcanine running it and the Water Terror as a support set is really cool, because this Pokemon is good as it is, but it just kind of, people have been using it, as I said already, in a different way to the standard Arcanine, but it's nice to see Hisuian Arcanine getting that choice, because it also gets the Stab Rock Slide as well as Flare Blitz and all the good stuff the normal Arcanine gets, and it gets a couple more points in attack, which is really, really good. And yeah, I like to see him using a support Arcanine instead of the fully aggressive Choice Band one I'm seeing a lot of. Guldengo as well, very much the same as Justin's Guldengo, is the Dragon Terror setup, Make It Rain variant. Ragav is actually using the Metal Coat though, which boosts the damage. I'm not entirely sure, so I don't want to just throw numbers out there like I know it, but obviously it boosts the damage, and it did very well for him because he managed to get to top 4 with this team. But the main bit of this team that I want to talk about is the Regidraco, and this Pokemon had a bit of spotlight on it when Regulation D or E, whenever it got introduced, was announced, because, you know, it can terrestrialize out of that dragon type that kind of nullifies it in all the other metas before it in Generation 8, and gets the steel type. Then you can run Terra Blast on it as well to just freely Oko Fluttermanes, which is really cool. But Dragon's Maw, Dragon Fang, if you didn't know, Regieleki actually got a nerf to Transistor, so it doesn't do as much damage. However, Regidraco's Dragon Maw didn't get a nerf, and I think that's because Regieleki is very, very good and has proven that time and time again, whereas Regidraco didn't really get any spotlight very much in Generation 8 Pokemon Sword and Shield, but now where it can change its type, it has, because it's now took a top 4 at a tournament, and a lot of people were trying to make it work, and I did see some success with it. I've not seen a ton, but Dragon Energy is just basically Torkoal Eruption, just Regidraco actually has some speed and has a really high special attack stat, and if you're not careful around this Pokemon, it can just destroy your entire team in a couple turns, like under the right circumstances. It gets Earth Power, so it can actually counter for other Pokemon as well, like Heatran, Guldengo, that sort of thing. Draco Meteor, just like the Salamence on Justin's team, is another really strong form of stab for Regidraco. If you lose loads of health on the Dragon Energy, you can just fire off a massive Draco Meteor and probably take a KO with that alone, being boosted by Dragon's Maw and Dragon Fang. And then Protect is obviously there because most Pokemon in competitive run Protect and it's nothing new. But yeah, this team is really cool, being centered around Urshifu and Regidraco, just dealing as much damage as fast as possible, hyper-aggressive style. But it's not obviously got the typical Iron Hands, Flutter Mane, all that sort of jazz, and I really like that Regidraco got used here instead of those Pokemon as a core pick, and I really like that the team is built around it. Yeah, I think this is a really cool team too. And finally, we come down to Chopper Cross, and I can't tell you how happy I was for Chopper. He has been grinding Scarlet and Violet VGC since obviously the game began. This is his game after all, but he's been getting countless second or top placements and just not winning a regional, and he finally did it with this team. What's really interesting is that this is the almost exact identical team that was used in the last regional at Lily, and it won that regional as well. And this is probably the team to beat at this current moment in time, as well as the core. Like Urshifu Tornadus is just so strong, Tailwind, and then you can use Choice Scarf, you can use Mystic Water on Urshifu, get the Rain Dance off, and you can just start slapping everything left, right, and center, taking KOs as and when you please. You've got Chiarmpao to even further lower the defense of Pokemon so that Urshifu just gains even further out of that, and then Terra Water. This thing is going nuclear, and you need to kind of just put it down as fast as possible before it destroys half your team or the whole thing, you know? Alongside that, we've got the Hisuian Arcanine. Once again, this is the Choice Band variant that I've been going on about, but this is actually Terra Normal, so that if you need to, I assume, you can go Terra Normal Extreme Speed and just take a KO as and when necessary. Chiarmpao is Terra Ghost, as it usually is. This one is running Sacred Sword instead of Crunch. That third move slot's always kind of been chosen by the person that's kind of using the Pokemon. Some people run Crunch, some people run Sucker Punch, some people run Sacred Sword. It's kind of like Chiarmpao is just a Pokemon that people play around with all sorts of different ways, and it has all sorts of different sets. Rillaboom is pretty typical here. It's the Fire Terror, the Assault Vest, and all the normal moves you'd typically see out of the Rillaboom. Tornadus, as said, is the typical Tornadus as well, and the Flutter Mane is the typical Flutter Mane. Just Chopper is running Booster Energy on this Flutter, and I'm not sure if that's the speed or the special attack. I would personally say that it's the speed variant because that's what we're seeing the most of at this current moment in time, as speed control is so important in VGC. But yeah, this team is pretty meta. I don't really have a lot to say about this team, but I was very pleased for Chopper to win because he's been grinding and he deserves it. The final mention I actually want to make about this team is the Rocky Helmet on the Tornadus. This is so if an Urshifu targets into the Tornadus, it's going to take like 30 to 50% damage, and it's not as simple as like just taking the KO on the Tornadus. You actually have to kind of sacrifice part of your Urshifu or other Pokemon to do the damage to it, and it is a really interesting choice and item. I think it definitely sits. I don't think you need Mental Herb. I don't think you necessarily need Covert Cloak. You've got the Ghost Terror. If you really need the Tailwinds, you can do that. But yeah, this is just a really good team. As I said, it's probably the team to beat at this moment in time. It's won 2 back-to-back regionals, and yeah, I'm not surprised. So now that we've gone through all the top pick Pokemon and all the best trainers from the event and their teams, I want to call this section what we have learned from the regional. And to me, on a personal, that's a ton of stuff. So we've kind of learned that the meta is very much the same. It's still very hyper aggressive. It's still about doing as much damage as possible. But there is definitely room to experiment, as these trainers have proven. There was a Regidraco in the top cut, there was a Teal Mask Ogerpon, there was a Thunderous Therian, and that just to me alone proves that if you do the calculating and you do the prep, that you can bring these really niche and unique picks and you can see success with them. And all you need to do is find that next niche Pokemon that can do what other people haven't even thought of yet, and it could lead you to that regional win. I also want to say that Urshifu, Rapid Strike, and Tornadus Hyper Aggression is still absolutely ridiculously strong, and it is definitely the core to beat looking at the tournament and the tournament beforehand. Yeah, they've won 2 back-to-back tournaments. Urshifu has won God knows how many tournaments already. Tornadus is just the best Tailwind setter in the game. It's being bulkier and bulkier, and it's getting like out of control at this point, so you definitely need to build your team around at least being able to beat that core, because I see a ton of that being played still and for the foreseeable future. future. And I definitely think that Hisuian Arcanine has kind of proven its word and is a top pick. And, you know, it's won 4 out of 4 Regulation E tournaments now. So I don't really think there's any room for denial. Yes, its typing is not the best, but we are in a game where you can change the type of your Pokemon. And as I said before, if it can nuke something before it goes and get an Intimidate off or do what it does best, like, it's a great Pokemon. I really don't think there's any room for argument with it. The stats change from the normal Arcanine definitely show. And yeah, there's a reason it's won 4 tournaments. And as for the video, guys, that is going to be about it. Now, I really hope you enjoyed this video if you're a VGC nerd like me. I know it's a bit more of an informative video compared to just the battles and stuff, but I really enjoyed making this video. It took me a long time to make this video as well. It actually took me over a week of different takes and recording and getting the energy to put it together and such. So if you did enjoy, please leave a like, leave a comment, tell me what you thought of the video, and tell me anything that I could fix up or what I didn't include. I love to hear feedback from you guys, and it's very much appreciated. If you aren't already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe to the channel and turn your post notifications on so you never miss a video from me, whether it be an informative video, me playing the ladder, whatever. You won't ever miss it that way. And I thank you all so much to the guys that made it to this point in the video. You guys are the best, and I love you all so much. So yeah, I really hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I've been Zephr, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Leaves hundreds of lives.